My name is Andrew Robel, and I am head of content strategy and publishing at Emerging Europe. Emerging Europe is a think tank based in London that talks about what we want to say, or how we say it, that triggers discussion about the social, economic, and democratic development of the region. We cover 23 countries from across Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. I am also responsible for strategy at the newly established Emerging Europe Alliance for Business Services, Innovation and Technology that has already, within 2 weeks of its existence, almost 20 founding members, including PwC in Central and Eastern Europe. And I will be happy to discuss innovation in the region. I would like to thank everyone who has stayed with us until this time of the day. I hope you will not be disappointed. I will try to trigger a very interesting discussion about innovation and the future of business in Central and Eastern Europe. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists, and I will start from my right. So Peter Stracker, CEO for GE in Europe. Then we have Jochen Stich, Digital Innovation Manager at Porsche Holding. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Almost, okay, all right. Klaus Reidel, President at the Austrian National Bank. I'll try to say that in English instead of saying that in German. And finally, the last but not least, Hannes Svoboda, President of the Vienna Institute of International Economic Studies, who you have pleasure of meeting earlier today. So the very first question that I would like to pose would be, over the last 30 years, politicians across Central and Eastern Europe have advertised the region as a low-cost location. We now see that, we talked about it throughout the whole day, that maybe this wasn't the best idea. Was that a mistake? I'll start with the governor.
I'm not the governor, I'm the
president, sorry.
That sounds more than it is to explain that. In Germany, the president of the central bank of the Deutsche Bundesbank is really the president. Here we have the governor, he is the face of the bank, he runs it, he's in Frankfurt. I'm something like a chairman of a supervisory board. This is not a commercial for me, but just that nobody thinks I overestimate myself. Okay. But now to the really important question. The question is, was the low-cost policy of Slovakia, Czech Republic, whatever, Hungary, Bulgaria, a mistake or not? And I say no. As I see it, and as another point where a lot of people will not agree, the low-cost strategy in labor cost was the only possibility to enter into a market economy as it was when they switched from the planned economy. And the next point, which I always favored, although many people are against it, their second entrance was the low taxes, the low corporate tax. Lower than all the others. We have 25 in Slovakia, I think it's 19, in Hungary it's even lower now.
In Bulgaria, probably 9 as far as I remember.
These 2 points were the only possibility, in my view, and I tell you then from my experience, in my view, how they ever got the chance to get into a value chain. Of course, in the beginning, you get the low-cost things, textiles and so on. Slovakia started very early with low costs in parts for automotive industry. Look at Slovakia now, which is a real hub for automotive production. And what they did afterwards, and what they are doing, they, for instance, Western Hungary on the Austrian border, wages got up. In Slovakia, the same. In Czech Republic, the same. even in Slovenia. And I was in the steel business for 30 years, and we once thought to buy a steel company in Slovakia, in Košice, or another one in Slovenia, and the low cost was our first main argument. But then we saw this cannot be the only thing. This is a good entry. But then, and that's what Slovakia, for instance, achieved, in my view, they went up or down, whatever you mean, the value chain. When you look now at the products, what these countries are doing after they entered with low costs and low taxes, they entered into a value chain, and look at the products that are coming from these countries now. They are really competitive. And when the Austrian industry where they delivered to the automotive industry in Germany, when they lost market shares, to whom did we lose it? To Spain, which was the purpose of the thing in Spain, to lower costs and to get competitive in their export business. Also, we lost it partly to Slovakia, to Czech Republic, because they went then down in the value chain or up the value chain, whatever you see it. And this, to answer your question, yes. And let me say something to the corporate tax, because they were all lower than we were, especially as Germany and all the others, when you take corporate tax, even income tax in certain countries. And this was highly criticized by some political groups here in the West. They say they receive subsidies from the EU, and then they compete with us against our taxes, with lower taxes. I said, yes. This we have to accept. This we have to accept. This is why I was always against a level of corporate tax. You can make the tax base equal so that you have comparison, but not at the beginning and what the tax rate is. And I think we should give these countries a chance to stay with their tax laws, and after 10 years, 15 years, perhaps then you bind them into a European Union thing. But I know it is highly criticized, but this was, in my opinion, the only chance, because they had well-trained people, they did not have any ideas about markets. When we enter a product, we had 3 rules. Do we know the product and the market? Do we know the technology? What is our market share? Are we number 2 or number 1 in worldwide market, in our niche? And the third point was, what is the EBIT margin? If the EBIT margin is not above in steel, which is very good, about 8%, we don't go into it. And these countries did the same, and I admire them for that.
But didn't it last for too long? You said at the beginning, but didn't it last too long, this low cost?
Well, look at Western Hungary, because I just met somebody who produces something there. Look at Slovakia. The costs are going up. The costs are going up.
Yeah, but we are sort of 30 years into the sort of transition period, right? Isn't it too long then?
No.
What does the business think about that?
And I mean, we have to, just one sentence, we have to improve productivity with our high wages, and we have to produce those products that can afford these high wage costs, and they will produce those where they can afford, and they know for their export industry that they have to go up the value chain.
Yeah, perhaps I may give you an example. Take Germany. Yeah, they didn't give the eastern part of Germany 30 years for adaptation. And look now what happened into the infrastructure. Yeah, infrastructure is still weak there. People are moving away from there. They had the luck, yeah, that they had a strong support. Yeah, but you need at least have one generation, yeah, not just 30 years. And I totally share that argument. Yeah, the low cost. Look at Mlada Boleslav. Look at Skoda. Okay, we increased the salaries now by 12%, yeah, but there are 23,000 people working at Mlada Boleslav, yeah, and it is not just the odd low-key functionalities which we do there. We have also within the group, the VW group overall, yeah, core competence centers. We have research and development. And this is something where all those core competence centers take value from the other brands. So there is an exchange of knowledges, but I totally agree. It cannot last for more than a generation, and the countries need now to invest into education to have a very solid basis for having those research development centers developed by themselves. But to be frank, we had our group day, as we call it, 30,000 people within Porsche Holding Group, and we had the first fully electric car from Skoda. And this has been not developed in the VW group. It has been developed in Mladá Boleslav. So yes, taking technology within a group, exchange of technologies, of knowledges, and this definitely needs to be the next step after those one generation low-cost locations, I would say.
Mr. Strucker, how do you see that?
You know, it's also always a question of a starting point, and the fact is that I am from Czech Republic and Slovakia. I am Visegrad too, so my father was from Slovakia, my mom from Czech, right? So, so the starting point is always important to me, where we are coming from. And the reality, the previous speaker was talking about heavy weight of manufacturing or production activities. That was the case before as well, right? So that what the region was good about, production, right? The second is there was a complete lack of capital. So that's not an easy starting point. And then the whole trade system collapsed, right? When we look on, I saw some of the numbers. So the Czech Republic was exporting in 1990 75% to Eastern countries, Russia and so on. Now it's 70 or 80% of export to Western Germany, right? The ownership from 100% state is to 90% private. So it was a tremendous change, and I would say quite successful. And by being manufacturing driven, I don't think, or production driven economy, it's not necessarily the big issue, right? The question is, and I think everybody agrees on that, how we can get gradually more innovation and more, let's say, added value in the economy compared where we were 10 years ago, 5 years ago now, and we are heading, and how sustainable then the business model really is. And I think that that issue has Europe as such, right? So I think Europe is great, and also when we look on our company, right, GE, we employ 100,000 people in Europe, and there is an enormous strength when it comes into designing of the assets in Europe, right? R&D, which is somehow driven with the equipment technology. But I think Europe is not that great in innovating business models and coming with a completely different concept. And this is where the Europe is lacking, right? And there are finance people here in the room, and when you look on the valuation of the investor, asset producers get maybe multiplier 1 to their revenue. The service companies maybe have multiplier 2 on their stock value, right? Technology guys 4, and now the latest wave of business organizer, how you call it, platforms, they are changing. They are not based on asset, but they really change completely the business model. Get 8, right? And none of those companies sits in Europe. So we have a European issue, and then we have a Central Europe, which has even more pronounced, I think, lack of capacity to innovate. And I think the discussion should be about, okay, what we do. Because I think everybody agrees, data was showing it, so what now? There maybe we can go to the next question, right?
Yeah, we're going to, I'm going to explain why I asked this first question, because, the competition is out there. So the rest of the world is now waiting for Central and Eastern Europe to get to a certain point. And that's why that was the reason why I asked this question. So now we can see that a lot of governments are actually looking at the, as you said, more value added sectors as well. And I remember a few months ago, I spoke to the Minister of Economy of Georgia, and I suddenly heard that Georgia, which has never promoted itself as an outsourcing destination, suddenly spotted the opportunity in the sector, in IT, in business services, and started promoting itself as a business services location. So my question now is, what does it take to translate these words of politicians from across the region to reality, to see this innovation? Is that innovation even happening in Central and Eastern Europe?
Maybe just a few words. I mean, if we would say that patent filing is the proxy for innovation, right? So, because in the end, innovation which has no commercial use is questionable, right? So innovation should be able to produce economic outcome, and I would say patent protection would be a good proxy. So, and when we look on who files the patents in Europe, there is only one public institution on top 100, and it's a Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. It's number, whatever, close to 100. The rest is private business. So my hopes actually are not really high that this is something what government can do, right? So if people advocate for, I have seen it, government being entrepreneurial, I think it's an oxymoron. Right. So, and the question is whether this is a role of the government. So,
but can they prepare the business environment properly to sort of foster growth of innovation?
And I will few sentences, and I give the space for my colleagues here. Right. So, question is then, what really is the role of the government, and what is the role of private business? And then how we overcome the structural issue, the size. I mean, the Central European countries are very small, so probably expect that we will be a massive hub for innovation in everything doesn't work, right? So I think that what government can do, and where actually the Central Europe is failing, is being good in something. And what government can be good in something, right, being not the average, is institutional efficiency, right? So the best way how to get investors in the country is that you know that, okay, you get company launch in one day if you want. Hong Kong can do that, for example. I live in Hong Kong. You can get company registered in one day. Did you get the building permit, not in 270 days, what is, Czech Republic now. It's compared to developed countries, actually. Some African countries are faster than that. Right, so that the state does, or governments, or they should be good at environment and institutional efficiency, and then letting business doing that what businesses should be good about, innovate, bring the innovation there, right? And then, okay, how can government support that activity of business? Okay, let's discuss that, and I think we can leave it in the further discussion, right?
Who would like to chip in here?
Well,
okay.
I mean, about the role of government, books and theses have been written in millions. This is a big question, and I lean more to a liberal side, that the government has to be good in institutions and efficient. In Austria, it still takes, I think, a month to register a company, but not so much because of the government, but because of the Chamber of Commerce, which has a very complicated system. But let me come to the innovation, because I think you touched a very important point. As I see it, when there is an industrial policy, not in the way that you have a plan for investments or markets, but an industrial policy that you ask yourself as a politician, where should Austria be industry-wise in 5 years? And where are the others? And then you see that the key point for this is training of the people and innovation. And how can you get an industry that is not an imitator, like the Chinese were 30 years ago, but is an innovator? And the innovator you can only get with research and development. And here you have to see how can the government help to do that. And Austria, I think, not because I'm Austrian, but Austria is a good example what we did. We have some government institutions, they give guarantees and cheap credits or subsidies to the interests for investments that help innovate. It's 14% now, you can get a premium in the Austrian tax law. Then we have some other institutions, and the big thing is that especially industry very often forgets that it's not only applied research, but that you need basic research. When you really want to become an innovator, you don't know what comes out of basic research. I give you a definition of what basic research is in a moment. But this you need, because you have spillover effects, you train people in thinking, and when they go to industry, they help. And basic research, what is basic research? Basic research is research driven by the curiosity of the researcher. That's it. They are not like applied research to want the car instead of diesel this or that, or the wheel, not the wheel, but the square, or I don't know what. But basic research is curiosity-driven research. And this Austria now finally started to do so at the universities, at the Academy of Science. We are the only Academy of Science in the Western world that has its own research, which was normally only in communist countries. All the others, Academy of Science, are a meeting of old people, not old, I mean, I'm also old, of people who give nice speeches. No, seriously, look at all the Western European Academies of Science. This is a meeting point once a year, twice a year. Whereas we, which is for the good and for the bad, but mostly it's for the good, we have real research centers. And then we have the Institute of Science and Technology in Austria, with about 600 people now, with 40 professors, with more than 50% ERC grants. I just say this as a little commercial, how good this institute is, which is near Vienna. And there we do basic research. And we already have now a business park that when there are some spillover effects, that you get entrepreneurs, this is what you mentioned, that you get entrepreneurs who take the risk. And our big role model, or whatever you say now, is the Weizmann Institute in Israel, in Rehovot, where we copy more or less the thing. But back to your answer. After the stage of cheap labor costs, lower corporate tax, but always with well-trained people, because I know that I was in Poldi, which is a steel mill near Prague, and I was in Košice, because we wanted to buy it in those days. What? Are you born in Košice? Yeah. Then the Americans bought it. I don't know who is still, yeah, who owns it now. But I was in Poldi, which was a special steel mill, called Poldi because it was the father of Wittgenstein. And his wife was called Leopoldine, and this is now a story. His wife was called Leopoldine, and so he called it Poldi. But to make the point to innovation, I think the next stage is, and these countries understand it. When you look, I look at Slovakia quite often. They spend money on innovation, also incentives for the industry. So I don't agree that business shall do business. Because, you know, when business people always invest in their own business, then you get an overcapacity there, and the market doesn't have the selection where the money flows. And this is what we need. The market shall decide where the money flows. But the government gives incentives because they want to know what in 5 years it should look like. I could talk more about it, but I better stop about my story.
I almost want to argue now, but I think, leave the space. I can come. I didn't forget what you say, but I leave the space for...
There will be other reasons to argue for you. Look, of course, low cost was initially the right way. How should these countries act differently than invite low cost? It was not only low cost, it was also some sort of a trained working capacity. The people had a labor force, by the way, trained by the state. If we look, for example, let's take the example of Ukraine. Ukraine is very, very, very good, is excellent on the digital capacities of its labor force. because there was the Soviet style of training, and the Soviet style of training was especially in the technical and mathematical field. And they're very good still in technical and mathematical field. So again, it was not only that the low cost and the private and taxes, even sometimes the tax rate was very low, but the taxes were not so low. So also to our colleagues, I said always here, don't only look at the tax rate, look at the real taxes. So there was also the public investment, and therefore the investment in education and what you said in science is very, very important, but not only here. You know, we look, for example, all to Silicon Valley, wonderful, this, you know, let's take aside Facebook and what Mr. Zuckerberg had to say yesterday. Somebody said he was a Mr. Sorenberg and not Zuckerberg. But it was based on innovation coming from the military-industrial complex, public investment. Or go to the procurement, public procurement for the railways, even for the airplanes if you look at the military. So there is a strong connection between public investment and private investment. Now, I don't say the public should do the same as the private, no. But it's not only the general framework. If politics does not take its obligation seriously, we will fail. And that is what's happening here. We can agree that will be happening. Look, if you look in our countries, but especially in these countries, and look who is the Minister for Science and Minister for Education, these people are generally not known. They are, unless they are scientists themselves, they are not very, very high ranked in the political ranking, because that's not so important. But that is a big mistake. Those who have to organize the educational and scientific system in a country, especially in view, and that was also my question first, in view of the coming robotization, automatization, digital economy, is very, very important. So it's not playing private against the public, but both have to be very good, both have to be very efficient, and always the difficulty is the transition from one period to another. The transition from the low-cost period to the productive quality period is very important. And the last point, because we just spoke also before, also concerning the remittances. There's a very good study on the question, do remittances help or not? If governments are not able, where we have strong remittances, especially on the Balkans, to bring these remittances into productive investment, and not only in building new houses and bigger houses and so on, they will fail. So although this question, yes, you can send people out, but the question is, what about the remittances, and about how many people do you get back? It's not that everybody should stay in their country, but governments have the responsibility to give incentives that the good people come back after some time, with the experience they have in Western countries, in the US, and so on. And that is, for example, what China did. China invited people who had been very high quality, people who have been Nobel Prize winner, said, please come back, because you have a lot to do in your own country. So again, the government is responsible for these things.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah.
One point, just shortly, because you mentioned the Weizmann University. I don't know who had the chance to look into the Israeli system of innovation. And if you have the chance to do that, excuse me, you do see exactly that combination of public involvement, going the way into innovative environment, and then leaving it in the private sector. And I can just give you the advice. Just have a glimpse on the Israeli system, where the people are educated, especially in the mathematical, naturwissenschaftliche, I don't know the English word, natural science, thank you, natural science, bitte? Yeah. Then going to the military services, being educated in the military services and taking over responsibility at a very, very low age, and then going outside to the universities and how the universities then support those people in the further education, then perhaps staying again for a longer time in the military services. And I had a couple of startups. Unfortunately, we all call them startups, but those were innovative companies who had a knowledge gathered from the military services and brought into productive private solutions. And this is exactly what you pointed out. I'm responsible for innovation at Porsche Holding, which is a retailing company. But not every idea is a good idea, and not every startup is really a good startup, I would say. So you don't disrupt the world every day. And so really, I'm very fond of that. We need to do something in this broader sense of education, combination of public services with private sectors. And we need to have also an awful lot of things to do on the European level, because I was working 5 years in Brussels. I was employed by VW in Germany. So I had the contract in Germany. I lived in Austria and I worked in Brussels. Have you ever made your income tax statement? 3 times? Totally different? So if we're talking about harmonization and building a larger block, then Europe has to do a lot of homework, also in favor of also the CE countries, to harmonize things, to facilitate things, and then go on forward together.
Yeah, but that was I was heading to, actually, right? And so my statement, and I think the experience shows that, right? That the play, the innovation play, which we all agree we needed in Europe, accelerate, and we needed even more to accelerate in Central Europe, that we have more in-house domestic innovation here, and that the certain connection between, let's say, public sector and private sector is needed. What I just was pointing to, that the smarter, better connectivity, which we miss actually in Europe, is the recipe, right? And that in the end, the private sector is more efficient in bringing it to the commercial end. And the US example, right? When the first jet engine was developed in US by GE, and yes, it was a military program, right? So, but I think that this is the difference, that in the end, a lot of also public funding, what US agencies do, and a lot of innovation came through the military investments, right? And in the end, is a lot of private initiatives. There were private companies and technology companies working from the beginning on that, and then later turning into large-scale commercial success, right? I mean, 50% of commercial jets are flying on GE engines globally, right? But it started as a military program, right? So the way is how we can get the public spending in R&D much more effective in Europe, and how we connect in a smarter way with the private sector. Because in the end, if it is just a research which stays on the paper, and a lot of that in Europe is like that, it has no commercial impact. And the second is the focus, right? I mean,
it has the commercial impact in the US and some other
maybe, right?
That's a problem, yeah.
You know, but then the second thing is focus, right? And that comes with that vision. I mean, what Austria, Czech Republic, and Hungary should be good about. Because if you spend 1.5% GDP on R&D, which is more or less the number, which is below OECD, by the way.
No,
but
not in Austria.
No, I'm speaking in Central Europe.
Yeah,
no. I know.
We have 3.1%.
Yeah.
But the goal is 3.7%.
But let me finish, right? So 1.5. And when you take 1.5% of the large economy, it gives much more dollar than 1.5% or even 3% for much smaller economies. So you cannot do R&D in everything. So, and that I think that certain national vision which goes beyond one government, which is always the problem in Central Europe, and then how you link it to the business and how you involve business. And Brussels can do a lot of things. I mean, the state aid rules, which we have in Brussels, doesn't make easy commercial and public cooperation in technology. It's very challenging, actually, to find a way how you can commercialize it, because you immediately run in the state aid. China doesn't have that issue, Canada doesn't have the issue, US doesn't have the issue, we have, right? So to be smarter on how we spend that money, I think that's the way, right? And again, I mean, yes, taking the barriers out and making the whole environment more open and getting countries and institutions cooperate easier, take the red tape out, I mean, yeah, that's a fundament for everything.
So before I let you continue, because no one has to forget me here, I'm here for still a couple of moments. I just wanted to circle back to those incentives by the government. Don't you think that some of the countries, for example, Poland or Hungary, we mentioned these earlier in the presentations, they don't want to focus more on those, because we were talking about giving incentives and sort of mobilizing people to act in the future, but the governments are focusing rather on those quick incentives, like in Poland, for example, lowering the retirement age or giving out the infamous 50 or 500 plus benefits. Isn't it going in the, so it seems like we're talking about innovation and about Silicon Valley and creating one here in the region, but then the measures that are taken are actually contrary to the hopes.
I just have a brief comment on that. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think one has to put pressure also from the European side. Of course, on the other hand, without defending the Polish or the Hungarian government, not at all, you have to have the balance. The question is, if you have, and you have this comparison now in Europe between East and West and between rich and poor countries. So the government have to do something on the social side. If you look for a pension, because we spoke today about the prices, but look about the pension across the border and the big difference. So you have to balance, but you're absolutely right that the priority are not right. But in continuing what just has been said, on the European level, we will have a lower budget after Brexit. Although I don't fully agree with what the Austrian position is, but in general, I would say it will be lower. I fear that one of the elements which will be cut is, for example, on research and development, on the European cooperation. And that would be totally wrong. I agree what you said about the state aid role and other issues. But if you want to overcome that the small countries cannot spend on everything, what has to be done is that you have a strong European program on research and development, helping these smaller countries to find their niche where they can cooperate with others, and you have these technology transfers. And therefore, I think one of our plea should really be on the government. Yes, if you have to cut, if you have to reduce it, don't do it on research and development. We need a strong European research and development program to be in competition with the US, with increasingly China. If you look to the list of the top universities, China is going up, and Europe is rather going down. So I think, therefore, this is a big issue. We should really be very strong to help these national governments not only to do what you said, but also to go really into research and development.
I mean, it's getting better, right? I think that because also the time were changing. I mean, unemployment was 10 years ago a bigger problem. So obviously, and I fully understand the governments that jobs is the currency of today, right? So it was a lot about job creation and getting investors, and a lot of incentives were about the jobs. And I think that everybody realizes, and from the communication we have in Hungary and Poland and Czech Republic, I think governments are realizing that in the current, let's say, period when the unemployment is less and less issue, at least in some regions still, there are structural issues. So they realize now, okay, we need to invest in the innovation. And the question is now how exactly to do that, right? And our view from the industry is, it is not that much about subsidizing it, right? But it is about finding, and it's maybe less even subsidizing production investment, but participating on the risk, because innovation is always about the risk. So, and the early stage of innovation is good, the bigger the risk is that it will be not turned into commercial success in the end, what business is about, right? And we have some example. We have example in Prague now that we manage in the aviation sector to find a way with the university there and how to find a good cooperation model. The university does some research and we then cooperate, and in the end it will be turning also into commercial applications. And I think that it is rethinking the way how the incentive should work, where you put the money, maybe going more into risk insurance, and this can help actually. The smart incentives like that in Central Europe can maybe convince more the global technology companies to place more research here, because this is also part of the story, right? It's okay, that's a good environment here, the people are here, and there are mechanisms which can take some of the risk of doing that research. You are probably more competitive, because to finish, I always say to everybody, there is in the dialogue in company, you know, INGI, it's a huge company, but also with the government, there is a huge competition everywhere. There is a competition within a company like GE, where you put your capital, how you allocate it, in which segments of the business, which countries. So it is not that there is, oh yeah, Central Europe is low cost, which is not even that biggest argument anymore. We put money there. No, you compete with GE investing in China, GE investing in US, GE investing in Western Europe, and so on. And then there is competition between countries as which country has the best investment climate. And with the mobility of today, I mean, investors are pretty selective. I mean, they can decide, okay, do I do it here, do it where I have the best skilled labor, where I have the best expertise, where I have the biggest legal safety. And I think they are coming back, that's what the government really can do. Because better than anybody else, bringing this environment, then investors feel safe. And, you know, and the risk of Central Europe, this middle trap is over maybe 10, 15 years, then if we do not get excellent in some of those dimensions, and you are everywhere the average, and the rest of the world is catching up, you may end up being less competitive than we were maybe 3, 4 years ago, or 10 years ago. And I think that's what the policymaker can do, right? And business has a lot of technology, and they can do actually better as well, but the connectivity. And I think that the recipe for Europe is still to be discovered, or in more efficient way, right?
So it seems that we are going towards demographics and the issue of talent and availability of talent. But before we do that, I heard one comment here about bringing commercial value to the U.S., for example, from sort of from the region, and a very interesting observation from Ukraine, for example. Our organization is working with a Ukrainian developer, and they're called MindK. But if you go to their website, you will never see that they are a Ukrainian company. All the details, their headquarters is in New York. All the contact details are in New York. Their salesperson is in New York, but their development team, they all sit in a small town near Kharkiv in the north of Ukraine. And that is, unfortunately, it seems like there's a lot of that happening right now. How do you think that affects the economies in the region? And is there a way of sort of stopping that?
You know, I mean, is it really a problem? Because where your market is, I mean, the reality is China, US, they are big markets, right? So if you do not make it in US in the software and technology, you probably don't make it, right? But the question is where the know-how really is. And if the brain power is, let's say, in Ukraine in that case, but you have a lot of companies like that also in the other parts of Central Europe that all the software development and the IP actually is sitting in. Like you have, you know, Avast, which is a Czech company, is the third biggest, probably by license, even the biggest antivirus company globally. I mean, all the software development and the skills in the IT security is in Prague, right? But the market is global, and the US is one of the biggest markets. So yes, the office and sales and marketing sits in the US. But this is what the world is about, right? I mean, we are in
but we're also talking about revenues, tax revenues, for example, right?
No, I think it's two issues. It's the tax revenues, but it's also the identification with the country. And as I was also recently in Kiev 2 weeks ago, and we discussed also this issue, I think that the government should give incentives that some offspring or whatever from such services can have some support of founding its own startup and its own company. So they can do the work for some other companies, but which is already done, but in a stronger way, so that they are Ukrainian companies who do work also for others, and finally also for the world market. So it is helpful in the first stage, yes, why not? But I think the second stage, and this is what will be the responsibility of the government, to give its own citizens the chance not only to work under the cover of other companies, but do it for themselves, and give some incentives for that. And that is also for the Balkans. If we have the Western Balkan countries, you don't have many resources. Yeah, you have some natural resources, but it's not too big. But the real resources is people. But if most of the people go away because they don't like to stay in the country, they don't have an opportunity, and they have strange and corrupt governments, then it doesn't help. So therefore, again, to have the program of all these governments to bring people back and give them the chance for creating some startups, even in close cooperation with some of the bigger companies, why not, to have an offspring? That is very important. It's not only a financial and economic issue, but it's also an issue of identification with your country. You should be proud of your country, that your country gives the chance, and that you can give something back to your own country.
Before I continue, I would welcome some questions from the floor. So if there are some questions, you can ask them straight away. There's a gentleman there. Would we have a mic? And we will continue in a second. Yeah. Could you introduce yourself and...
Franz Nauschnig, Austrian Central Bank. One question, you were always talking about innovation, startups, research and development. I think we, for example, in Austria, we have a very good system for startups, research and development funding. But what we lack, it's later down. It's risk capital. Because we have a lot of startups, for example, university from startups. We were talking with guys from a university. We said, yeah, we got a lot of capital. And when we asked him, it was 90% from the US and the UK. So these companies are not listed on the Austrian stock exchange, but in London or New York or somewhere else. And in Central and Eastern Europe, it's even more extreme. So we need some risk capital. And the second thing which we have is China, for example, there is no reciprocity and FDI. A Chinese company can, as it happened, take over an Austrian company, take a majority stake, and squeeze out the Austrian investors, delist from the Austrian stock exchange, and then the intellectual property is, how should I say, moving in a certain direction. Here we should act not as individual Europeans, but vis-à-vis China, we can only act as the EU, because individually we will get lost.
Please.
Perhaps to your first point, this is something, you know, this is typical European. I'm a financial guy. I started in Dresdner Bank, and we wanted to set up in 1989 venture capital in Dresdner Bank. It was not possible. It was not possible. Venture capitalists, like you do see in Silicon Valley, you have seen for ages in the US. You have seen them in the UK as well, but you have never seen them in Europe, mainland Europe, I would say. So at those times of liquidity all over, it seems that the European attitude, sentiment, is so risk averse, that they don't go for such kind of risk. The European way is a very conservative, credit-oriented way. The US, American, UK is an investment attitude. That means you may fail or not. The European way is always based on how is my money being paid back? This is the first question, which is not with US investors. And I've seen now a couple of accelerators, incubators, however they are called. Very interesting ideas. The European is not able to invest in ideas. We have some venture capitalists who try to introduce things, but definitely myself, I'm lacking the idea why I should invest in 10 and knowing 9 of them will fail.
And one you make enough profit.
Yeah, but
that's the idea.
No, but I'm looking for the one. Yeah,
that's your eyes.
Yeah,
no, may I say something?
This is where I'm very European, and most of the people, but well educated in Austria for the last 15 years.
That's the best combination you can have.
Yeah. But nevertheless, it's European.
No, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, but this is really the European problem, to invest into ideas who turn out to be good ideas or bad ideas. This is not the mindset. That's a problem. Exactly, we are looking for the one unicorn, and we are not investing in 9 others.
May I add, first, it is evident that the European industry is credit financed and the American and British industry is capital market financed. You have about 70% in this way here with credit and exactly 70% in the States. You get your money from the market through capital increases or IPOs or whatever. This is correct. What?
Europe is the banks.
Yeah, Europe is the banks. I mean, in Austria, in the 50s, the banks gave out bonds to finance industry. Instead, the industry made capital increases. This was reverse thinking. But this has other reasons. But let me come back to the venture capital. Franz, what you said. Venture capital is not our mentality. There I agree. But it's getting better. It's getting much better for 2 reasons. First, the venture capitalists learn how to present themselves, and they know they can only get equity and not credits when they have an idea. And the second point is that in Austria, people are willing to take losses when they see the chance that they can make money on one. I give a personal example. I am invested in 4. Now, 1 is already bankrupt. In 3. No, it's no joke. The one was in Munich, biological stuff. I'm invested in 3 venture capitals. 1 in California, a mouse that produces anti-genes, very successful thing. And then here in Austria, 2, 1, I don't know if it will ever, may I say who else is invested? Yeah, Hannes' wife is invested with me and in this one company. No, but what I want to...
They still hope. They still hope.
Yeah, we still hope. Yeah, we still hope. No, but what I want to say is, when I started these investments, I knew 3 out of 5 will fail, because I was very often in the States, and I went to school in the States for 1 year, and one of my friends invested in a lot of things. But
You didn't know which one.
yeah, but I had the hope that 2 out of the 5, I don't know which one, you will make so much money that you can finance the losses. And this attitude, and now I come to the point you said, this attitude not many people have, but it gets better and better. I am not in favor, what is now discussed, that the state shall do this. Because when the state invests in venture capital, the first loss they have, a parliamentary commission will analyze who did a mistake, because the state doesn't know what risk sharing means and risk taking means. So the state is nothing. We have in Austria one system which is very good. In Austria we have a state-owned company that invests in startups when 50% of the money comes from a private investor, and the private investor, so to speak, gives the business angel or so. This is quite good. The state gives some money and takes himself out of the management. So this is something because to make it easier to take risks. But I'm really convinced with the banks and all their regulations, you will not be able to finance innovation. You need equity. And we have enough funds and institutions, private institutions, that could afford it. And it's a question of mentality. Perhaps you can do something tax-wise, that you can take the losses longer from one for the next years of investment. But on the other hand, I say this is risk-taking. And before people give their money in some stupid bonds or in some saving accounts where you don't get any interest at all, or a little, I don't know what the actual rate is, why don't we educate the people, the rich, I mean the people who can afford it. You cannot credit finance these investments, to be quite frank. I mean, you have to be able to, like shares, you have to be able to take risks. But to sum up, Franz, what you mentioned, I think the situation, even in Austria, with all our strict education, and I was brought up, no risk, and keep your money, and things like that, that the thing is going to get better.
But just one point, yeah, but very, very slow. Yeah, and definitely you need to be able to afford such an investment, definitely. But there are masses of money out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they are looking to be invested. What is lacking is the innovation ecosystem. Yeah, which means the environment where an innovation, you trust into innovation. Yeah, not in an idea. Yeah, but you need to give, I think, the systematic framework to develop sustainable innovation in such an ecosystem. Not just having an idea. Yeah? This is, I think the Silicon way is not applicable to Europe. This is why I mentioned the Israeli way, which I'm very much in favor of, where you have really a good road where innovation, where ideas are brought on economic basis. Not just the idea. And we are all, as Europeans, we have this civil servant attitude. Looking for the pension, looking to have your fixed salary paid every month.
Low but fixed.
Yeah, but okay, you have a security. And so we are risk adverse. And if you look
it's
into...
Getting better.
It's getting better.
Look at Berlin, look at
Berlin.
Vienna.
Look at the enterprises. Look at VW. 3 to 4 years ago, nobody at VW would have invested into a joint venture. It must always been 50 plus.
Yeah, I know.
And definitely not in such things like digilabs, where ideas are produced, but in an outer space. So they're giving more room to those ideas. But I personally have the perception it's too slow. It's speeding up. Yeah, it is faster than it has been in 1989. Okay, Dresdner Bank is bankrupt, but not because of the venture capitalists. But we need to increase speed in that, and we need to have the trust of the venture capitalists, yeah, coming from the US, coming from the UK into this European ecosystem. Because the ideas, we do have them. We have good people who produce IP, yeah? We have a lot of patents. So we have those innovations, we have those people, and I had in Brussels, yeah, a software provider who was originated in Sofia. But his headquarters was at the Côte d'Azur for very good reasons, yeah? So making your point again, yeah, there is, I think, a good core of education in the CEE in Europe, yeah, but we need to have the environment.
I'll give you an interesting example.
Okay.
Right? So,
first you and then another example I have.
now, there are segments where Europe is doing pretty good, and one of them is additive manufacturing, 3D printing, which I think this will be a massive revolution in manufacturing technology, right? So you print with using metals, actually, parts.
3D printing.
3D printing.
Yeah, 3D printing.
Metal, right?
Yeah, which goes against foundries, for instance.
Right. And, you know, we, as a company, invested heavily in that, and we bought recently a German company. So, and it was a startup, and that's an interesting story. So, an engineer in Germany working in that area came to that like 15 years ago that printing metal and using lasers could be an idea. And he made it. So he then really did produce a first industrial scale 3D printing machine about 10 years ago. Money came from his father-in-law. So he married another student. The school was expert in laser. They put it together. Father-in-law gave them more than €1 million. And so no bank, no other investment, family money. And they created something which really works. You know, we acquire part of the company, right? So, and you can think about how you can accelerate it, because not everybody has actually source that you can get, right? So a lot of ideas don't find the money, right? So it's not, you know, I would be careful that we don't put too gloom picture. It is really how we work on that, what Europe is and countries are, because, you know, the culture is there and the way of doing things. So I think we will not become American way of doing things. It's just impossible, like they will not become European. It's just different history, different thinking. But what we can learn and how we can accelerate. And in the end, it's always coming back on how you finance risk, how you retain talent, and how you combine institutional angle, which is important, with the force of the private entrepreneurship, whether it's big or small, and that force of innovation and this private initiative, right? And how you join these forces in a smarter way than we do so far. And there is a progress, but we need to accelerate. That's, I think everybody agrees, and I repeat myself, and in Central Europe more than anywhere else compared to Western Europe, right?
Well, I think it can be done. I was recently in Kenya and Silicon Savannah. Kenya, you know, everybody said, well, Africa, East Africa, not very developed. But what they did, and there was one prominent, semi-politician who was a professor, they really started to do something very innovative in many ways. Of course, the one was fiberglass connection, and everybody said, why do you do it? There's no reason for doing it. And then they started all the other elements, including, instead of banking, you always transfer money by the iPhone, because there are no banks. So, but a very elaborate system. Why not say, for example, European Union, with some of the bigger companies say, let's have a Silicon Balkan, for example. Let's have the people on the Balkan doing something innovative, Serbs, Kosovars, Albanians, whatever, to work together and to build up a digital structure in the country. To go another way and to invite some people who are working now with GE or in the Silicon Valley or some other place, going back, paying them well, and try something new. I think that is very important. If we only do the same way what we did until now, investment here, investment there, I think we need some push. We need some as Walt Rostov said, some new stage of development in these areas. Otherwise, people will continue to emigrate, and the best people will emigrate. In the former times, it was, you know, workers who are working on the construction side, whatever. Now more and more the best people will emigrate if they don't have any hope to stay there. So we have to have a bigger push than some of the small investment, giving it perhaps a prominent name, a provocative name, and this is the only way, I think, to bring the region forward.
There is a gentleman who has a question. Could you introduce yourself, please?
A question to Mr. Stich, because I didn't fully understand what we learned from the Israeli experience. Israel, just like the US, there's an enormous link to military. And the military is a high-tech industry, basically. Yeah? It also has another feature that probably in Israel more than in America, the cost the sensitivity and cost is rather low in the military because you want to achieve the top thing, whatever it costs. Yeah, you have to win the war, basically. Yeah, there was a famous book written once, The Baroque Arsenal, yeah, by Mary Kaldor, I don't know, where generals usually ask for further embellishments, yeah, of every item they have, and there is usually not a budgetary restriction. Yeah, so this explains a lot why you really are working on the technology frontier, but if we come to Europe, what's the equivalent here of this military angle here? In some sense, I like the last comment you made by Mr. Starker that one has to find a European way. There are two other very different features of Europe compared to the US or Israel or China, I guess. One is the university system. There's a very, very strong concentration of research money on top universities, so a highly hierarchical system of research institutions and university. Should Europe go in this direction? It's true, in England we have a little bit of that, yeah? And it does develop a sort of business around Cambridge and Oxford. You have a similar phenomenon here. But this is really a dramatic break with the rather more horizontal and broad-based educational and university structures, yeah? And the other one is finance, which again, Europe had in the historically certain advantages with a bank-based system here, because banks which are heavily involved in the same companies pursue them over a long time horizon. Probably banks have lost that to some extent, yeah? But it used to be a very strong element, and on the other hand, the American capital market system has disadvantages, disadvantages, namely the quick in and out phenomenon here, which we see there. So what I'm trying to find out is to which extent would you actually move towards reforming a European system without continuously looking at something which is basically not ingrained in the European structures?
I'm very much in favor of the Israeli style to a certain extent. I'm also in favor of some of the parts of the US-American way. And what I think, you pointed it out, yeah, we need to have an European way made out of that. First, the financing side is an attitude. Okay, it's improving, understood, yeah. But Silicon Valley didn't get into existence just because of venture capitalists. This is not the only reasoning. This is why I'm talking about an innovation ecosystem. Then I'm turning to the Israeli case. What does such an innovation ecosystem, aside money, yeah, needs to have? And this is also the educational basis, especially in math, natural science, which in Europe is definitely on the downturn in the educational, basic educational systems. Second is a good education in the military services, because we learned also that many of the innovation came from the military developments, I would say. Same applies for the internet. And then what I find extremely good is to open this top secret, especially in the cybersecurity area, knowledge to commercialization. This is where you get the people out, and then they need again to have the money, and also the Israeli entrepreneurs, they need to get their money from the US. They don't get it in Israel. So there is a lack again. But if we were able to have the European attitude change a little bit, have some of those topics, which I was mentioning from the US and the advantages from Israel, put into a European way, I think it could make a good European innovation ecosystem. You do see it at some universities. Let's take Aachen, because there is a very good commercialization case. You had the basic research at the TU Aachen in the electro-scooter. The e-scooter was built originally in the university. It went into the e-scooter GmbH, and now the Deutsche Post is one of the largest producers of such an it's a lorry, it's a small truck. And there you have the basic research going into commercialization. The only thing which lacks again, because I know that those people tried very hard, was the finance again. They were lucky that no other OEM in Germany or wherever could produce such a car at that price. This is why Deutsche Post was obliged to take over the production of that car. But this is something, from the educational part, and we have that also in Austria. If you look into the Graz area, into the Linz area, we do have potential. We have as Kreisel, an extremely interesting e-mobility infrastructure. We have others, Messerschmitts in Graz, they have extremely good ideas. In Linz, a couple of things are existing. But we are lacking some of those, I would say, modules, I do see in functioning ecosystems. So not everybody here has to travel to Silicon Valley to make those zoo visits. We need to have it here, and the lucky thing is people don't have to move in the future. You don't have to localize intellectual property or intellectual development to a certain state. You can allocate people. We have the technical things and underlying to bring people together without moving people. And this is something which is also new, and we need also to have big data being made to smart data. All those things is a combination where you don't have to move people. You need to have a harmonization on this heterogeneous European picture. Yes, and you need to have most probably a European initiative, which gives you the harmonized framework. And then you don't have to move people. You don't have to invest in Albania, Kosovo, or whatever, but you can pack people together in a development.
There is a question here from the floor.
I'm listening to you. So I'm a European who's lived in the United States. I've taught at the University of Michigan Business School for a long time, and other places. I'm at Columbia University now. I agree with you. It just somehow seems to me a little bit surreal in the sense that we've been at these conferences for a number of years, realizing that the European tax system disadvantages equity capital compared to loans. And why is it taking decades that we're still talking only and steps have not been taken, right? In other words, you guys presumably have been pushing, right, consistently in order to change this. Why has it not changed? I mean, Europe is full of educated people. They understand this. So there must be some problem. A couple of points. The other point is, you mentioned the culture. You know, it's true, but between 1/3 and 2/3 of students at leading American business schools are from all over the world, including Europe, right? So there's plenty of people who then become entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley, wherever. They do it here. So I think that that's not such a big issue. It's again the environment that has not been conducive. I think that not everybody is an entrepreneur, not everybody, you know, some people are better as employees. They sort themselves out. The entrepreneurial people go to a business school, the ones who are really good civil servants go to School of Public Administration, International Affairs, so on. So there is a self-selection which takes place, no problem. But I think really the key is that Europe somehow has not been able to recognize these basic things, like you know, environment, tax policy. In the 1990s, why have European firms not jumped on the bandwagon of digital economy, right? All the big firms in this are American, now Chinese, you know, East Asian essentially. We're still only talking about it rather than being there, and yet, you're right, lots of the things, the initial discoveries are in European schools, laboratories, internet. You know, 1990s, right? It started in the difference department of the US and moved to universities and then commercialized. But some of the ideas were at CERN and other European institutions, just were not seized. So what is it in the environment where you guys press and presumably can have an effect that you don't?
Well, you are going, Professor, exactly on that somehow my beginning, right? That institutional efficiency and preparing easier environment for business being done and innovation being done, you know, starting companies, closing companies. And I think that this is where, I mean, the regulation is sometimes too complicated. I think this is a bit of the DNA what we have, right? And this is probably a strong belief that everything has to be somehow managed and regulated, and that and I think that this is part of the European maybe issue, that there is a strong belief that regulations solve the problem. So you have a problem, so let's create another regulation. You find it's an issue, oh, let's create another regulation on top of that. And I think that this is part of that initial role. I mean, what is the role of different parts of the society and institutions? And I believe that the, you know, government, first of all, I mean, government will never be a good bank, it's never will be a great investor. I mean, this is not designed for it, but it has this regulatory power, right? And so thinking about how you enable the business and innovation and other things, and not how you necessarily regulate it, right? And there is a big discussion about data and data privacy, right, currently in the world. And I think that you have extremes from zero, almost zero regulation. We see some part of it now happening. And then you have European, which is, again, almost too far regulation, right? And very little distinction between private data, personal data, and machine data, right? And if we overdo it again, we will inhibit some of the evolution, right? Especially machine-produced data, which are not personalized. Who owns them? How it will be regulated? And I mean, a lot of industry was machine data should not be regulated. It should be subject of the agreement between involved businesses, let's say airline and technology supplier, how they exchange and how they do with the non-personalized data. I mean, sensors producing signals from the engines, how it's done. No, there is a strong effort to regulate that as well in Europe before we even start to utilize it, right? So this goes in that part of the DNA, and I mean, yeah, I don't know, I don't have a 100% answer how to overcome it and how to move it forward, because that's one of the barriers, right? And Europe is full of the red tape, actually.
Mr. Right.
So.
Now, before we all end up in a very pessimistic mood and deplore that Europe is going down the drain, let me point out a couple of things. First, it is true that in all the software businesses, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Internet, Europe is behind the United States. But in hardware, look at European cars. Do you want to drive an American car? Hell, never. No, look at the European steel industry and look at the American steel industry. When I was there 10 years ago, I thought it's a museum. No, the people were just on break at noon. But look, so we did a lot of innovation. And you will always need steel. Even in the industry 4.0, you will need steel. And you will need cars. And in the manufacturing, not only Germany, also in Italy, northern Italy, France, and certain areas, or electric power production. It's all Europe that is much more efficient than the Americans. They are strong in their software things. So this is the first point. Let's not be too pessimistic. Then the last point, I mean, all these regulations, I agree, and I gave a lot of speeches in Austria, what were over-regulated and our chamber system. Everybody's member of a chamber in Austria, the Chamber of Labor, the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of the Lawyers, the Chamber of the Civil, the dentists and the doctors, and the Chamber of those, you know, the bookkeepers, how do you call it, chartered accountants. I agree, but on the other hand, we do have a certain degree on consumer protection. And look at the States. In the States, you don't have a lot of this red tape, which is sometimes not good, but then you have these crazy lawsuits with the class action suits that people sue because there was no regulation before. I mean, one has to see both sides. So, I don't want to say that we are so good, and I don't want to say that here it's all the best, but we have achieved a lot. The software, I know we are way behind the Americans, but a lot of things I don't want that American habits come to Austria or to Europe. The litigation lawyers, horrible, it's a business. In America, when you get out of a hospital, you have 10 lawyers, they say, let's sue the hospital. You don't pay anything, I get 1/3, which is not allowed in Europe, as you well know. Or when you take in the States all the educational system. I mean, you have a basis with the high school, which is, not very high, it's called high school. The level is not very high. And then you have this privately financed big schools, Harvard and so on and so forth. But even in those schools, and you must know that much better, 1/3 of the students is on sports, 1/3 is on scholarship, and 1/3 pays. When I was in Harvard, it was 2 years ago, I met some friends there, and I listened to his speech, and they told me that. So, I mean, for the good and for the bad, you have to see how things are. So one thing, it's not so bad. And my last point is, when you look at these rankings of World Economic Forum, you know, the competitiveness index, or the IMD, the International Management Development Institute in Geneva, I think, no, in Lausanne. And in these rankings, you have big categories. One is government efficiency, where we are not good in Europe, and Austria especially not good. Hong Kong is in these very high up always. Singapore, and you're right. It's not good. But I must say, when you know to have indicators, the IMD has, I think, 270, and then they have quality, where they ask people, how do you feel, security, and so on and so forth. But when in these rankings on the business side, how efficient is business? How is the innovation? We are not doing so badly. I mean, Austria is now in the WEF, World Economic Forum. They have about 66 or something, and we are now placed 16 or so. It's not so bad. And in business, We are much better than the average. So when we are 16 on the average, we are by government sometimes number 50 in efficiency, but in business sophistication, we are sometimes number 8 or so. So I just don't want that we go home and say everything is bad, everything goes down, no startups, no innovation, no money. That's not the case.
Thank you very much for this optimistic view. We have one more question here from the floor.
Yeah, I guess it's a little question and a somewhat bigger comment. Since I'm doing a little bit of economic history, I want to remind you that there were a lot of innovations taking place in the late 19th century, early 20th century in Europe.
Yeah, only in Europe.
Yeah, well,
not
not
Mr. Bell and the one with the light bulb.
And Mr. Edison was a British guy as well. That's we know for sure. What I want to say is that, well, you can take many industries. Yeah, German chemical industry, for instance, that was evolving at that time, and then suddenly it all switched to the United States. So why I bring this to the floor? You say Europeans are conservative, they don't want to take risk, and so on. It doesn't look like that this was the case 100 years ago. And what I suggest is probably that the networks of people moved from one place to another due to some unfavorable events, something like 2 world wars, one after another. And I probably want to remind you the quotation from Mr. Hilbert, who was a great German mathematician, who was asked then in the middle of the 40s what happened with the German mathematical school, and he said, well, it disappeared, simply because most of the people just moved to the US. And bringing these people back, these networks of researchers, basic research and applied research back, is an enormous cost, because bringing one person is not a problem, because you can pay him a lot. But bringing 100 researchers back is probably prohibitive. And the question is, does Europe really want to spend so much money on this when you can enjoy these failed businesses in the US and then import the working business models from there with the products? Maybe it's just not that bad that you are not forward, but a little bit behind, because you save some money on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. I mean, Europe is great, by the way, right? No. I'm not done yet, right? And our company loves Europe, and we employ 100,000 people here. A lot of innovation. What I want to say is, past success doesn't guarantee you future success, right? So, and when you look why the great company fails, complacency, right? You believe, oh, we are good, everything's fine, we just do a little bit more of that. And I think that's what the discussion is about here. So it is about, that the Central Europe, with all the success, cannot get complacent. And there is exactly the time to rethink for Central Europe. Okay, we know the recipe for last 30 years. It was pretty good, actually. And when you look on the living standards and the progress, I mean, it is great. I mean, this part of the world has probably the best living standards with all the challenges in last, 100 years, I guess. And the question is, okay, is it sustainable for next 30 years? And I think agreement is no, we need the changes. And the same is the true for the Europe and other countries, right? So there are cycles, and I think that Europe is in the cycle. So telling that everything is great, we agree to that. The discussion here is about, fine, what do we need to change that we keep that success of the past, which was fantastic, by the way. And the trajectory, when you look on all the data, is rather slowing down. So we need to change something. And I think that this is the discussion, what we are here about, and that's what the conferences are about, right? And the question is, okay, why you make the conference to reality? That's another story, but all the smart discussion.
Well, yeah, I can agree. I mean, if you go further back, it was China who was the big inventor in many respects. Then they became complacent. Then, for example, one emperor stopped the one admiral who was going around the world. And we have to say that European invention, the most productive period was after developing capitalism, but also colonialism. So at the time when we looked out in a very imperialistic way, but we looked out. And then it came the two wars. When we started to fight against each other in Europe, it was the end, more or less the beginning of the end, because the US, with the development of the military, with the victory of the military, they really got the first hand, and they got the innovation prize. Secondly, what to do, because I fully agree we have to change something. The question of regulation was put up. Now look about Facebook. How to combine privacy laws, and we did that in the European Union, with openness to useful use of data, with protection of that's a big issue. When we still discussed, and I was for 18 years in European Parliament on legislation, and we did too much. I really have to say we did too many legislation and not the right one or not the right sector, because in some elements we need really European legislation. And of course it's difficult to combine 28 or 27 countries without some sort of a regulation, and you mentioned some examples where we should do it. But now, if you look at what Facebook did, Mr. Zuckerberg, where is the balance? And this is the real issue we have to find. And the second issue is, for me, less regulation, but more control of the regulation we do. Because we have so many regulations, especially on European level, but we have a minimum of really control if the regulation is good, if the regulation is efficient, and if the regulation is obeyed. So I think this is what we do in Europe, not in the easy way now the government said all regulation before that year is void. No, but we really have to reduce regulations, concentrate on some issues, concentrate on the issues which are really important for promoting European industry, European innovation, European look for innovation, and what we need also in the schools, for example. We have a school system where we learn more, but less on how to use the knowledge. With the knowledge we have in our computers, we need more teaching about how to use it sensible, how to differentiate between fake news and real knowledge, and not add knowledge every year to our schools. So I think what Europe really would do and could do to dramatically change our educational system in using the modern instrument, but teaching people how to innovate, how to act in industry. For example, somebody told me recently, yes, when we more and more we go with the computer now in the preschool or even maybe in the kindergarten. Yes, but then again, in all the 8 or 10 or 9 years of school, we don't learn really how to use it in a way where we can produce, again, knowledge and not repeat things which has been done for centuries already. So I think these are some of the issues Europe could do. For example, really changing dramatically the educational system.
Thank you. We have the very final question, very short one, and a very short answer as well.
I just want to point to a little controversy, actually. We've been talking this morning that governments in Central and Southeastern Europe are not really good. Now we again hear that governments are not good in doing business. And we are talking about that actually Western Balkan investment framework, the European banks, Chinese banks, when it comes to investments in infrastructure, they're actually asking government what to do. So governments are actually business innovators when it comes to investments into infrastructure. Something is in little discrepancy. Do we really think that governments are not good in doing business? And then we are investing according to their ideas? Or we think that governments are actually good in making investment decisions.
Who would like to take that?
The answer is quite simple. Government should stay out of all businesses what the market supplies. You don't need a steel mill that's owned by the government because there are no enough private steel mills. But infrastructure, water, education, roads, railways, this is the task of the government.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Why then Europe was not able to put container on container for 150 years, and America and Australia and China doing that as a standard practice?
You mean these long trucks or what?
No, just container on the railways. It improves efficiency and productivity of the railways.
Yeah, this is the 28 countries. I mean, this is the same. I was told if we had in Europe the American aviation control system, we could on one airport allow more planes to start and land if we had the American system, but so every country has its own air control, which is really stupid. No,
you know, to this government question, it is really about efficiency, or are the governments acting in Central Europe or focusing on the right thing? And then there is also, I would say, a progress, right? So where we were in 1990, where we were in 2000, 2010, and I think that in certain areas, we didn't fully play the potential of the economies, and that was partly, I think, partly also case of maybe not strong enough governance and progress in certain areas like law and you know, the enforcement of the law and stability of the legal environment and right? And I think that this is where our governments in the region just could do much better, right? And when you look on certain parameters, you know, how long takes you certain business procedures when you need to go with the institution, and what was the progress in the last 10 years. In many cases, it got worse, right? So, and when you look on the growing number of the state employees, you know, bureaucracy, I think in many countries it's just going up, right? I look somewhere the number. I think the Czech Republic has as many public servants as California. And then look on the size of the economies and so on, right? So, and the number is growing. Yeah, I know.
In California, you don't have any doctors and nurses in the public service. Here you have it. So this is a big difference. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
And you have also a lot of red tape in the United States.
Yeah.
I can tell you about tax income declaration. A hell of a work.
Okay.
I have to say that I haven't done really much work today. I have had fantastic panelists, and we could actually go on and on and on, as you can see. Thank you very much for staying with us until now, and I would like to ask you for a round of applause for our panelists at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, you wanted controversy, you got it.